Well, good morning, everybody, and I want to thank you for joining me in this little journey that we're going to take through Good Friday, day when we remember all that Jesus went through for us. And just one thing I want to point out before we get started on our journey. If you received the timeline, I just want you to know that there's only one time that we're really sure about on this page, and that's the hour of when Jesus died. This hour between noon and 3 p.m. when 3 hours of darkness fell upon the land, and Jesus died at 3 p.m. The other times are kind of speculative, and there is an account in Mark tells us, for example, that Jesus was crucified in the third hour, which would be 9 o'clock. John says it was about the 6th hour, which would be before noon. The other gospel writers seem to suggest noon. So, there's kind of a window there when we talk about when Jesus was actually crucified and how we reconcile that. Mark may be referring to the time when Jesus was condemned by Pilate, and the events that transpired from that time. John may be referring to the time when Jesus was actually on Golgotha and the crucifixion actually took place. We're not sure. But we do know that sometime between those hours of 9 and maybe 11 in the morning before the 6th hour, Jesus was crucified between the two thieves. But this morning starts out somewhere early in the morning, 4:30, maybe 5 a.m. Jesus had just spent the night in excruciating, really intense prayer. We're told in Luke that he prayed so intensely that he was sweating drops of blood. He knows what he's about to face. And so very early in the morning, the temple guards came and they arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is at the foot of the Mount of Olives, on the western side of that mount, presumably. And they bind Jesus, they arrest him, and they take him to the home of Annas, which was probably about 3/4 of a mile, maybe, of a walk. It wasn't all that far. And so that's where we pick up the story of Good Friday. Jesus arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's being brought to Annas. And so I'm going to begin reading. This is from A Harmony of the Gospels. This was written by one of my professors, actually, Dr. Gordon Olson. And basically what it does, it combines the four Gospels into one account. So this is very early in the morning, before sunrise, and Jesus is being brought to Annas. It says this: "So the band of soldiers under their commander and the temple police arrested Jesus and tied him up. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Indeed, it was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people." So they were planning this. This was in their minds to do this to Jesus. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was following Jesus, as was another disciple, presumably John. That disciple was an acquaintance of the high priest. So John apparently knew the high priest. He was an acquaintance of the high priest. So he went with Jesus into the high priest's outer courtyard. So John remained very close to Jesus through this time. But Peter remained standing outside by the door. So the other disciple, the one who had known the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept the door to bring Peter in. John was kind of getting Peter to come in at least to the outer court. Now the slaves and the servants had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. And they were standing and warming themselves, and Peter was also with them warming himself. Then the servant girl who kept the door getting a better look at him standing in the firelight, said to Peter, "You were one of those who was with Jesus the Nazarene. Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" He retorted, "Woman, I am not. I do not know what you're talking about. I do not even know him." Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus responded, "I have always taught openly in the synagogues and in the temple courts, where all the Jews come together. I have not said anything in secret. So then why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I have spoken. They heard what I said. Look, they know me." But when he had said this, one of the temple police standing nearby slapped him in the face, demanding, "Is this the way that you answer the high priest?" "If I have spoken wrongly," Jesus responded, "give evidence about the wrong. But if rightly, why do you hit me?" Annas therefore sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. And so Jesus is now brought before the high priest Caiaphas. Then those who had arrested him led him away and took him to the house of Caiaphas the high priest, where all the chief priests, the elders, and the legal teachers had gathered together. Indeed, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. So some were giving false testimony by saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another that is made without hands.' Yet even about this, their testimony did not really agree. So the high priest stood up before them all and questioned Jesus. 'Are you not going to give any answer to what these men are testifying against you?' However, Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. The high priest was again questioning him by saying, 'Are you the Messiah, the Son of God, the Blessed One?' Indeed, Jesus affirmed, 'I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Almighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven.' Consequently, the high priest reacted by tearing his cloak, exclaiming, 'What further witness do we need? You have heard the blasphemy. What is your decision?' Indeed, they all condemned him to be deserving of death." So here, Jesus is informally charged by Caiaphas and those who were there at the time. He's being charged with blasphemy, and so he now is going to come into a place where he is formally charged by the Sanhedrin. And we'll pick that up in our next segment.